No cameras, no translators. Just a cold stone room deep beneath the Vatican. Donald Trump sat across from Pope Francis. Between them, an ancient dossier sealed in red wax marked Codex Veritas. The Pope looked him straight in the eye and spoke slowly. You didn't come here to believe me. You came here to see what they've been hiding for over a century. Before we dive back into the story, drop a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. And if compelling stories like this are your thing, make sure to hit that follow. Tomorrow's episode is going to be unforgettable. It arrived without fanfare. A single envelope, cream white, linen texture, Vatican seal pressed in crimson wax. No return address, no digital trace, no security protocol flagged it. But the moment it hit the desk of Senator Alicia Graham, chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee, something in her gut twisted. The courier, a young man in clerical black, said nothing. He handed over the envelope, bowed slightly, and walked away like his job had ended the second her fingers touched it. The outer layer bore no urgency markings, no diplomatic priority stamp. Just two words handwritten in precise Latin script. Ad urgente confidentium, for urgent confidentiality. Inside was a single page. Printed on thick paper with ornate Vatican watermarks, the message was short, surgical in its clarity. To the Senate Intelligence Committee, this letter is issued by the Apostolic Office under the direct authority of His Holiness Pope Francis. A matter of international consequence demands a secure private audience between the Supreme Pontiff and former U.S. President Donald J. Trump. This request is non-negotiable. The content of the briefing is known only to His Holiness and must be delivered in person. Time frame, immediate. Location, Rome. Security, discreet. It wasn't a question. It wasn't even a diplomatic invitation. It was a command wrapped in silk, issued from the highest moral authority on earth, and aimed at one of the most controversial political figures in modern American history. Senator Graham reread the letter 3 times before handing it to her chief of staff, who scanned it with the look of someone expecting a prank. "Is this real?" he whispered. The seal was authenticated in under 6 hours. Papal signature confirmed. Encryption protocols aligned with Vatican diplomatic transmissions. It was real. But the bigger question wasn't if it was genuine. It was, why Trump? He held no office. He had no official power. And yet, the Holy See had bypassed heads of state, intelligence agencies, and even the sitting president of the United States to speak to a man who'd been off the international stage for over 2 years. Was it political? Religious? Something buried between? Theories exploded within closed-door meetings on Capitol Hill. One aide called it a spiritual trap. Another called it a last-ditch power grab. But none of them had access to what the Vatican knew. Within 24 hours, Trump's private jet was cleared for unregistered landing at Ciampino Air Base. No press, no schedule, no staff. The manifest listed a single passenger, Donald J. Trump, and in a windowless chamber beneath the Apostolic Palace, Pope Francis was already waiting. Not with incense or blessing, but with a leather-bound dossier locked by brass clasps and a title embossed in Latin, Codex Veritas. A document not seen since 1963, one that, if exposed, would not merely shift the balance of power, but redefine what power was. And the only person the Pope was willing to share it with was Donald Trump. The room was cold, not in temperature, but in tone. No windows, no flags, no symbols of office. Just stone walls and silence thick enough to drown in. A single wooden table sat at the center, unadorned. On one side, Pope Francis. On the other, Donald J. Trump. No aides, no translators, no security detail in sight. Whatever this was, it wasn't diplomacy. It was something older, something quieter. The Pope didn't speak right away. He simply studied Trump, not like a politician assessing an opponent, but like a surgeon examining an X-ray before the first cut. Trump, for his part, didn't flinch. He leaned back slightly, arms folded, expression unreadable. But in his eyes, there was calculation, because Trump wasn't just here to listen. He was here to decide. Finally, the Pope moved. He placed a leather-bound dossier on the table. Weathered edges, brass clasps, and a single Latin inscription embossed on its cover. Codex Veritas. The truth, Francis said softly. Not the media's truth, not the church's truth, the one they buried before either existed. Trump raised an eyebrow, unmoved. Who's they? The Pope smiled faintly. The ones who never left the room. Every time a leader changed hands, they stayed seated. He undid the clasp. The folder opened with a quiet crack. Pages yellowed, ink faded, but names still visible. Some crossed out, some underlined, some circled in red. These files, the Pope continued, document operations hidden beneath the veil of diplomacy. Post-World War II manipulations, financial controls, a system designed not to serve nations, but to contain them. Trump leaned forward. And why are you showing me this? The answer came without pause. Because you're the only one not pretending to be holy. The words didn't sting. They landed. And for the first time in years, Trump said nothing. The Pope tapped one specific page, a diagram, intricate, circular, branching lines connecting governments, media conglomerates, and religious institutions. At the center, a symbol. Neither cross, nor flag, nor logo. Just a simple eye, watching. They don't lead, Francis said. They manage belief. They decide what version of truth the world wakes up to. Trump studied the diagram in silence. Then slowly he nodded. And you want to blow the lid off it? He asked. The Pope's gaze hardened. I want someone who's not afraid to pull the fuse. Outside, the bells of St. Peter's began to toll. But down here, in the Vatican's deepest room, time was already unraveling. And the question was no longer if the truth would come out, but who would survive it. Trump turned the page. The ink had faded, but not enough to obscure the names. CEOS generals, cardinals, presidents, a mosaic of power woven across decades. Some had ruled openly, others operated in the dark. All had something in common. They were part of the Codex. Pope Francis folded his hands, eyes locked on Trump. It began in 1949. A council, unofficial and unacknowledged, was formed after World War II, not to prevent another war, but to control the shape of peace. Trump scanned the next page. The Atlantic Banking Accord, a 12-nation financial pact signed behind closed doors, never ratified by any elected body, but enforced globally. Beneath it, signatures in multiple inks and one curious line of red print. Operational sovereignty may be waived in cases of narrative misalignment. Trump narrowed his eyes. Narrative misalignment? Francis nodded. When a government tells the truth before it's convenient. The pages became darker, graphs with no y-axis, ledger codes tied to institutions that, officially, didn't exist. Payments routed through Vatican accounts, then redirected to shell NGOs, think tanks, and media foundations across 4 continents. And then, pages that shouldn't have existed at all. One contained a photograph, grainy, black and white, a meeting room somewhere in Eastern Europe. Around the table sat a Soviet diplomat, a CIA official, a Jesuit priest, and a man whose face had been redacted entirely. The caption read, Codex Session 12, Contingency Planning for United States Electoral Disruption. Dated, March 1983. Trump closed the folder for a beat. You've had this the whole time? The Pope nodded, unblinking. And more. Francis reached beneath the table and produced a secondary binder, slimmer but newer. This one bore a silver seal and the initials CRA, Codex Reinforcement Archive. This contains the revisions, he said, what they changed, what they erased, and who helped them do it. Trump flipped it open. The first page wasn't historical, it was recent, a memo from 2018, marked Eyes Only. It referenced an experiment in algorithmic persuasion using social platforms to precondition voters before election cycles. The term used was clinical, predictive outcome reinforcement through narrative framing. Trump chuckled dryly. Mind control with better branding. Francis didn't smile. Number, it's something worse. Consent by illusion. Then came the final page. A map. Not political, not territorial. A web. Nodes marked in red, yellow, and green, each connected by thin black lines. At the top, Vatican Internal Codex Protocol, monitoring points for disruption events. Trump tapped a red node labeled DC. It pulsed softly. What happens if I expose this? He asked. Francis didn't answer right away. He simply turned over the last page, a single quote, printed in Latin and translated below. When truth is no longer dangerous, it is no longer necessary. Trump leaned back, eyes narrowing. Then it's still necessary, he muttered. And the fuse at last was lit. Back aboard his jet, Donald Trump sat alone in the rear cabin. The folder still sealed but seared into memory. The hum of the engines was the only sound, but his thoughts were louder than jet turbines. Tell the world what he'd seen, or let the world keep sleepwalking into control. The Codex wasn't just a historical archive. It was a manual, a living system, and it wasn't broken. It was working exactly as designed. Designed to filter, to pacify, to redirect outrage into rituals of democracy that meant little more than televised consent. But Trump had a choice, a dangerous one. If he said nothing, he could keep the power he still had, his platform, his influence, the constant gravitational pull of his name in global politics. If he spoke out, he would become a threat not just to a party or a system, but to a design, the real machine behind the illusion of disagreement. He opened his phone. No signal. Vatican protocol. Complete blackout. That in itself was a message. They still had rules he wasn't supposed to break. His team, what was left of them, didn't know what he'd just witnessed. Jared was in Manhattan. Don Jr. was hosting a podcast. No one had eyes on him. Not the media. Not the Secret Service. Not even the intelligence community. For once in years, he was off-grid. And that was when he became the most dangerous man in the world. He thought about the line from the binder, consent by illusion. Then another line from Francis. You're the only one not pretending to be holy. He looked out the window, past the clouds, past the atmosphere, into a void so still it almost looked honest. If he exposed the Codex, he wouldn't just go down in history, he'd set history on fire. But then came the second dilemma, the quieter one. What if they were already planning for this? What if telling the truth was part of the control mechanism, an allowed eruption, a calculated leak, designed to let people feel informed while nothing changed? That was the brilliance of the Codex. It didn't rely on lies. It relied on selective truths. Leaked at the right time, to the right people, to reinforce the illusion of awakening. Trump tapped the folder. He didn't trust institutions, but now he didn't trust exposure either. What if his move played right into the hand he thought he was about to beat, and yet doing nothing meant surrendering to a silence that would bury the truth once more? He reached for a pen, not to write a speech, not to call a press conference. He wrote 2 words on the inside of the folder. Controlled burn, a plan, a sequence, a reveal, not to shock, but to dismantle. Not all at once, but surgically, untraceably, in a way the Codex couldn't predict, because if the system couldn't be destroyed from the outside, it would have to be undone from within. And Donald Trump, for better or worse, had just volunteered. The first strike didn't come from the media, it came from inside the machine. Less than 48 hours after Trump's jet touched down in New Jersey, 3 encrypted data centers affiliated with his former PAC went dark. Simultaneously, no breach alerts, no digital fingerprints, just offline. By the time his cybersecurity team tried to reroute access, federal auditors, ones no one had heard of, were already issuing sealed warrants for tax irregularities dating back to 2015. Too fast to be coincidence, too precise to be improvised. The Codex wasn't retaliating, it was recalibrating. And Trump knew it. At Mar-a-Lago, his private communications server was hit with a software update no one authorized. 4 team members reported their personal phones locked remotely. One had a car remote wiped while driving. This wasn't surveillance. This was a warning. Then came the message. Not public, not printed. A white envelope. No return address. Delivered to a valet at Trump National Golf Club in Bedminster. Inside, a photo. It was a still image, a grainy black and white taken through thermal lensing. The subject, Trump. Standing in the Vatican archive room, captioned only with 2 words in red typewriter ink. You were seen. He didn't show it to anyone. He didn't need to, because hours later the second wave began, this time in the media. A sudden flood of coordinated op-eds across major platforms. New York Times, The Atlantic, even overseas outlets like Le Monde and Der Spiegel, all with eerily similar headlines. Trump and the Vatican, a new axis of disinformation. Pope Francis in the shadow of extremism. Reckless conversations when religion meets the radical right, narrative control. Frame the meeting as chaos. Paint the truth as conspiracy. And it was working. Polls shifted. Supporters were confused. Talking heads warned of destabilization narratives. Even former allies began issuing vague, distancing statements. But Trump didn't respond. Because this wasn't panic, it was confirmation. The Codex didn't operate through denial. It worked through drowning. Overwhelm the truth with distortion. Create so many versions of reality that no one remembers what the first one looked like. That was Project Peter's Veil, the Vatican-born doctrine of engineered ambiguity. And now it had been reactivated. Trump called Tulsi Gabbard that night. She didn't answer. But when he opened his encrypted email server, there was a single file waiting from an anonymous address, titled Book of Echoes, Phase 2 Authorization. He opened it. Inside, a blueprint, not just of what had been done to him, but how to reverse it, line by line, layer by layer, the counter-algorithm to the Codex. Hidden, fragmented, designed to be assembled only when the veil dropped. Trump smiled. They saw him. But now, he saw them. Inside the Vatican, the pressure wasn't whispered. It echoed in stone hallways like a verdict waiting for delivery. Within 72 hours of Trump's departure, the Curia Romana, the governing body beneath the Pope, called an emergency assembly. Not in St. Peter's Basilica, not in public, but in the Sala del Concistoro, the private chamber where popes are warned, not asked. 4 cardinals led the charge. Not the old conservatives from past scandals. These were modern, polished, and fluent in global diplomacy. They wore smiles, not robes of condemnation. But beneath the surface, their tone was unmistakable. Contain this, or be contained. The senior among them, Cardinal Mazzini, spoke first. You gave him the Codex, he said, each word precise. You broke the seal and bypassed sovereign clearance. Do you understand what that implies? Pope Francis didn't blink. I understand it implies we've mistaken silence for protection. Mazzini's jaw tensed. You gave dangerous knowledge to a destabilizing figure, a man already seen as a threat to world order. Francis raised an eyebrow. If the world order fears questions, perhaps it deserves to be threatened. Across the table, Cardinal Ortega interjected, softer but sharper. We have spent decades constructing credibility, interfaith, intergovernmental trust. You risk unraveling all of it for a man with a Twitter account and unfinished grievances? Francis didn't flinch. And you've spent decades preserving ambiguity. Is that trust or fear of being seen? They pressed harder. They referenced internal protocols, diplomatic fallouts, potential sanctions. One cardinal even hinted, carefully, at invoking Canon 333 Section 3, a rarely cited provision that allows action if a pope is incapable of fulfilling his office. It was a threat, cloaked in Latin. But Francis didn't waver. He stood slowly, placing both hands on the oak table. I was elected to shepherd souls, not shield systems. The church does not exist to defend the Codex. It exists to expose it when no one else will. A pause, heavy, unforgiving. Then he dropped the hammer. You're not protecting the faith. You're protecting the infrastructure built around its absence. Mazzini rose halfway from his chair. You are dangerously close to schism, Holiness. Francis leaned in, his voice low, steady. I am dangerously close to truth, and that terrifies you more than heresy ever did. The cardinals left the chamber one by one. No blessing, no parting words. But they wouldn't forget this room. Neither would Francis. Later that night, alone in his study, he pulled a sealed envelope from a hidden drawer. marked with a single symbol, the I. Inside a slip of paper. No names, no instructions, just a sentence. The next move is yours. He stared at it, then lit a match. The paper curled in flame, but the meaning remained. The war wasn't over. It had just stepped into the sanctum. It began not with a press conference, but with a packet, delivered anonymously to 3 independent journalists across 3 continents. No subject line, no sender, just a black USB drive and a note. Verify everything, then decide if the world deserves to know. Within 24 hours, the first file dropped. Not on CNN, not on Fox, not even on mainstream platforms. It appeared on the archive, an encrypted, decentralized forum used by whistleblowers, rogue analysts, and digital outcasts. Title: Codex Fragment, Phase 1, The Vatican Ledger. Inside were over 72 gigabytes of internal Vatican memos, bank transfers, and geopolitical strategy notes spanning from 1954 to 2022. None of it doctored, all of it time-stamped, with names. What made it terrifying wasn't the information itself. It was the design behind it. The documents showed the Codex wasn't a single event or decision. It was a global operating system, self-healing, self-redacting. With inputs from media, religion, markets, and culture, each used to shape consent, not reflected. Within hours, hashtags exploded. #sign Codex leak, #sign Papal Protocol, #sign Truth Without Borders. Governments scrambled. Vatican spokespersons issued deepfake warnings. But encryption experts from MIT, Tel Aviv, and Tokyo verified the files within the first 36 hours. They were real. The world hadn't just been manipulated, it had been programmed. The second leak hit harder, a full 9-minute audio file recorded inside the Vatican archive room. Pope Francis speaking directly to Donald Trump. "This isn't about theology, Mr. Trump. This is about custody of the truth, and how long we've allowed fear to wear its robes." That quote alone ricocheted through every major outlet. In Europe, protests erupted outside embassies. In Brazil, civil agencies demanded transparency on IMF loan structures linked to Codex pathways. In the U.S., Senate hearings were called not to investigate the Codex, but to question how Trump got the files. Classic misdirection. The Codex was working even as it unraveled. But the third leak was uncontainable, a full list. Names, roles, timelines. It wasn't just who participated, it was who stayed silent. Global figures, editors-in-chief, former presidents, financial regulators, even tech CEOs whose platforms had been weaponized as perception control hubs. The final file was a simple image. One word typed in the middle, echo. Beneath it, a blinking cursor. It wasn't a message, it was a challenge. Now that you've heard the truth, what will you do with the echo? And while the world screamed, spun, and speculated, Donald J. Trump sat quietly in a private compound, watching everything unfold. He didn't say a word, because when you've already lit the fuse, you don't need to shout. You just wait for the blast. The room wasn't large, no marble, no stained glass, no cameras, just 4 walls, 1 wooden table, and 2 men who no longer needed introductions. Pope Francis sat across from Donald Trump, the air between them thick with something no document could capture. Consequence. The world outside had already changed. Markets had trembled. Political alliances had fractured. Congregations across continents whispered the same question. Was any of it ever real? And now the 2 men who had lit the match sat in silence, staring not at each other, but at what rested on the table, the final page of the Codex. Neither man spoke for nearly 5 minutes. They didn't need to. The world had heard everything else. This moment wasn't about revelations. It was about responsibility. Francis broke the silence. "They'll never forgive either of us." Trump gave a dry chuckle. "They never did." The Pope smiled faintly. "We were just the first ones foolish enough to treat truth like a calling instead of a currency." Trump leaned forward, fingertips resting on the worn edge of the dossier. "What happens now?" Francis looked to the ceiling as if the answer might come from the heavens or echo back from history. Now the lie has no center, and that makes the truth dangerous again. Trump nodded slowly. He had faced impeachment, indictment, media crucifixion. But this was something else. This was irreversible. Across the table, Francis slid over a single item, a key, old, iron, heavy, with an inscription barely visible to the eye. Sedes Veritatis, the seat of truth. It's not symbolic, the Pope said. It opens the chamber beneath the old archive, the part no one digitized, the part even I wasn't meant to access. Trump studied the key for a long moment. Then gently he closed his hand around it. No promises were made. No press releases prepared. This wasn't about legacy anymore. It was about finishing what had begun in silence. Outside the room, a storm had begun rolling over Rome, thunder low and deliberate, as if even the sky was waiting for what came next. Francis stood first. "I won't be here for the ending," he said, "but I needed to know someone was willing to begin it." Trump rose, no handshake, no ceremony. Just two men walking out of history's most secret chapter, one toward prayer, the other toward confrontation. And on the table between the empty chairs remained one final slip of parchment. Its ink was faded, but its message clear. Truth delayed is not truth denied, but delay it long enough and it becomes something else. Permission. The screen fades to black. No anthem, no voiceover, just a date, blinking in silence. November 4th, 2025. And beneath it, the audit has only just begun.